Good morning. Jim Dandy O'Kelly here with the History of the Virus, Part 2. Maybe. This audio is going to be about viruses in different tracks from different books, mostly from the 1940s, that promoted the idea that this virus, which was actually a poison, the definition meant poison, the definition meant a poison substance produced in the body by a disease. I've kind of touched on this before. We're going to show you how people were basically brainwashed. The medical profession was brainwashed by the promoters, whether they were ignorant of what they were promoting or the deliberate, cold-blooded people who simply knew they were lying about the cause of disease. Those who took the original definition of poison and changed it into something that was alive to cause human disease. I'm going to try to go in a chronological order in date of these books, and it will show you the story that will kind of give you an idea of how the American people, the entire world as a matter of fact, was actually brainwashed into this idea that viruses were alive, even though they were invisible, nobody could see them, and they admit this. And these are the kind of quotes that I'm going to give you now. The first quote is from a book called The True Healing Art, and it was written by Russell Thackeray Troll, medical doctor, in a speech he delivered at the Smithsonian Institute in the year of 1880. But the important point here is that on page 46, he makes a reference to what a virus really is. And it goes like this. He's talking about a Professor Payne who quotes approvingly the famous professional adage in good technical Latin. Now, I'm going to spell this because I don't know how to pronounce Latin, but it's called UBI, then virus, V-I-R-U-S, then IBI, then V-I-T-U-S. Now here's what he says, and I quote, which being translated means, our strongest poisons are our best remedies. There he is obviously calling a virus a poison, and this is what it meant, and how they used it in all medical books back in the 1800s. Now you've heard much about the isolating of a virus. Let me kind of go back to the origin, to the history of this isolation, which literally means the isolation of poison. I'm going to use my reference here, probably the best reference you can have, the American Medical Association itself. They wrote a book in 1913 called The History of Inoculation and Vaccination. It was a lecture memoranda of the AMA meeting in Minneapolis, Minnesota in 1913. On page 10, I quote where they say a Colonel Serpa Pinto, the Portuguese traveler, found in 1877 that certain races in Northeast Africa practiced a form of inoculation against the bites of poisonous snakes. He states that they mixed the venom of serpents with certain vegetable juices and rubbed the brown paste so formed into incisions in the skin of the arm. He was thus inoculated himself and states that the operation was followed by pain and swelling, but it seemed to be effective and to produce an immunity to certain poisons, as he was afterwards bitten by a venomous snake without any after effects. Now the point being that first of all, we're talking about snake venom being a virus, being a poison, and this is what many dictionaries tell you what it was. The other point that we're going to make here is that on one of my other books, there's a medical doctor who talks about the effects of being bit by poisonous snakes and talks about it's like only a 7% of the people bitten by a poisonous snake that die in the first place. So when this guy says he took some of this poison and put it in his body or scratched it on his arm and he got bit by a snake and he didn't die, was no proof that he became immune because of putting the poison in his system. And if you stop to think about it, they're taking the product of disease again and trying to say it prevents disease. And this just makes no sense at all. Then he goes on to say the bush Negroes in Suriname also are said to practice a similar method of inoculation to protect themselves against the bites of poisonous snakes. Then the book says Bruce, in his Voyage to the Sources of the Nile, 1790, says he found that inoculation as a protection against smallpox has been practiced in Nubia from time immemorial by the Negresses, the Arab women, Nubians, Shillooks, and other native tribes. The operation was called by them Tidiri, or as among other African nations, bind the smallpox. The method was by contact. A woman would bind a piece of cotton material round the arm of someone suffering from smallpox, which when impregnated with the virus, that's the poison, she would apply it to the arm of her child. Bruce states that nobody was known either in Senegal or Abyssinia who had smallpox more than once. Well, we know that that's totally not true. People get smallpox several times. But here again, what they're doing is taking the product of disease, the pus of a smallpox sore, and injecting it into someone and saying that it protected them simply because they didn't get the disease again or get it, period. This is a conclusion. You must think about this. You inject polio vaccine into your body. 3 months later, you don't get polio. You conclude or assume that you didn't get polio because you were injected with this poison or product of disease. How many people never got injected with polio who never got polio? Which is your common sense proof that isopathy, or the product of disease preventing disease, is fallacious. Let's move up to 1929, The Facts Against Compulsory Vaccination by H.B. Anderson. On page 119, the caption is, How Vaccine Virus is Prepared, Method Used in England. Just substitute the word how vaccine poison, because what they're talking about is vaccine, vac meaning cow, cowpox poison. How they're preparing cowpox poison in England. This is an extract from the Epidemiology and Public Health, Volume 1, 1922, by Dr. Victor C. Vaughan, former president of the American Medical Association, page 199. At the present time, the bovine virus is used in most countries. However, Scherer, writing in 1918, gives the following method for the preparation of vaccine employed in England. Female calves from 2 to 4 months old are taken. They are sometimes tested with tuberculin and always kept under observation for a few days, then clipped and thoroughly cleansed. The belly is completely shaved and prepared as for operation. About 100 small scarifications are now made under strict asepsis. Slight bleeding occurs, which is mopped up. The virus, meaning poison, which is obtained from a human case and preserved on sterile bone slips, is inoculated on each area. Now let me mention, they said it took it from a human case. They took the pus from a person with smallpox, and they're using this to make and infect a cow with it. The lesions are allowed to dry. Sterile gauze then covers the lesions. The animals are kept clean, excreta being promptly removed. The animal must not kick itself. Within 48 hours, a reaction occurs and the animal is killed after 6 days. Strict asepsis as for operation is observed. The field of papules is cleansed and curated. After curettage, serum exudes. Slips are charged with this and the pulpy exudate is made up of this. Glycerin 50%, water 49%, phenol 1%. The glycerin pulp is left standing 3 to 4 weeks and it is always infected with bacteria. At the end of this time, these should have undergone dissolution. The pulp is then titrated and put up in capillary tubes. The vaccine is tested bacteriologically and not put up till sterile. Also, it is tested for tetanus and its potency estimated by the type of vesicle it produces. Now notice what they're saying here, folks, is this poison, this product of disease, always has bacteria in it. This was the beginning of the germ theory when Pasteur took that pus, put it under his dark field microscope, which sees living things, by the way, and saw the germs. It was a fact he saw germs or bacteria in pus. It was a conclusion that the germ or bacteria was the cause of the pus or the disease, where many medical researchers have said that he was totally wrong and that the germs and bacteria were the result of the disease. Okay, but either way, notice that they want to kill all the bacteria before they inject it back into a human being. This is what you call a virus, the poison minus the living bacteria. This book here was written in 1924, and it's the International Conference on Health Problems in Tropical America. I turn to page 42, and it says, the amount of disease in the community depends to a certain extent upon the amount of virus as well as upon the facilities for its transfer and related influences. The amount and distribution of the active principle is probably one of the prime underlying factors in the generation of some diseases in epidemic proportions. And says other diseases such as smallpox and measles probably propagate themselves entirely independently of the amount of virus. The point being that this book, written by medical doctors, is one of the reasons that the medical people believed that a virus was a living agent that caused human disease. Here is a book that is probably one of the most important means or books of miscommunication, and this is what happens when the medical profession, ignorant in themselves, will get their information from the deceivers, the shysters, and the liars. This is how the average mom and dad, particularly mother in this case, was told the lie about viruses. And this is the Mother's Encyclopedia. This was written in 1942. And it was the Parents Institute, the publishers of Parents Magazine, as I said. And this is volume 1. Now I'm going to go to the chapter on colds. Now this chapter was written by Dorothy V. Whipple, medical doctor, medical officer, Division of Research in Child Development, Children's Bureau, Washington. This is another one of your experts that everybody trusted and believed, and she either deliberately misled or had no clue to what was going on. And here's what she said, and brace yourself, because this is incredible that anybody would actually believe this. She says, so far medical science has been unable to answer the question, how can we rid the land of the common cold? You know, these people should have realized why it was so common in the first place. Although the final answer has not yet been written, a number of facts about the cold have been established. Some of these facts confirm popular beliefs about the cold. Others definitely refute them. The common cold is an acute communicable disease caused by the growth of a specific germ in the nose or throat. As yet, the germ that causes colds has never been seen nor isolated. It belongs to a group of organisms that are so small they cannot be seen even under the most powerful microscope, small enough to pass right through the very finely meshed porcelain filters that hold back ordinary germs. Disease-producing agents of this class are called filterable viruses. The fact that they cannot be seen, that they cannot be prepared with certainty in the laboratory, makes research difficult. Nevertheless, it is now established that a living agent exists belonging to the class of filterable viruses that is capable of producing this disease. It is also established that the presence of this disease agent is necessary for the development of a cold. A true cold never develops unless the virus is present. I'm going to continue in a second, but we need to go back and talk about some of this, because if you've gotten my other audios, you now know where the source of this nonsense comes from. When she's talking about this going right through porcelain filters, they're filterable viruses, she's talking about Martinus Beijerinck and his tobacco mosaic plant sap that he called a virus and said was alive and attacked the plant when he injected this stuff directly into the plant. When she says it makes research difficult because they can't see it, what kind of a statement is that? But nevertheless, they've established it, that it's alive. This is all it is, people. They said it's alive. It was Thomas Rivers in 1927 that told everyone, it's alive. We'll call it a filterable virus. It causes your disease. And that was it, promoted by the powerful Rockefellers and their buddies in government. And this is how they got away with it. Here they go again. Why we get colds? We get colds because we come in contact with the virus. We do not get colds because we get wet feet, or sit in a draft, or become chilled, in spite of the popular conviction to the contrary. Under the careful conditions of the laboratory, the common cold has always been produced in a susceptible person whenever some of the virus of the cold was placed on the mucous membrane of his nose or throat. But it has never been produced in the laboratory when the same susceptible person was subjected to any of the chilling procedures frequently held responsible for producing the infection. The virus is thus the primary cause of the common cold. Without the virus, there can be no cold. Now, I want to go back again. Notice the word susceptible. You're familiar with that. They always use the word susceptible. If you think about that, they're telling you that the so-called germ or virus or whatever they want to tell you can't do anything unless your body is weak. That you are susceptible means you have no resistance, so-called resistance. That means that the virus or germ is not the cause, because if it was the cause, it wouldn't make any difference whether your system was weak or strong. Think about this for a second. So the real cause of your cold or any other disease is why your body is weak, which would obviously be, if you think about it, eating the wrong food, not exercising, foul air, or stress. These are the real causes, not any so-called outside agent that's dead or alive. Now we're going to move up to 1942. A booklet called Doctor, What Can I Do? Facts about Infantile Paralysis, put out by the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis. That is now called the March of Dimes. The president was Basil O'Connor. The chief of the virology department was Thomas Rivers, the man who coined the word virology back in 1927. This is where the liars and the deceivers and the shysters moved in to convince the world that a virus, which is a poison, was a living agent that caused human disease. Here's your proof on page 8 under the title Cause of the Disease. The virus, which causes infantile paralysis, is a form of germ too small to be seen even under the most powerful microscope. It will pass through the finest filters. Hence, it has been frequently called an ultramicroscopic or filterable virus. These people ought to know. They just forgot to tell the reader that the filterable virus was Martinus Beijerinck in the beginning. The filterable virus was when Simon Flexner and Landsteiner ground up the spinal cords of human beings and turned it into a liquid and injected it into the brains of the monkeys, causing them to be limping around, and then they said that this was the cause of polio. Once again, we turn to the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis. That again is Basil O'Connor and Thomas Rivers of the Rockefeller Foundation. Wrote another little booklet called The Importance of Research. We turn to page 6 and 7, and they say, what is the nature of the virus causing poliomyelitis? Upon what sort of food does it live and how does it multiply? Does it pick out nerve cells and only certain nerve cells? Folks, these people should have been put in jail, for God's sake. They knew exactly that these questions were ridiculous and they were fooling the people. They knew the virus was a poison that they manufactured in a laboratory and it didn't eat anything. They knew that it only caused disease when they injected it into other animals, guinea pigs, mice, or whatever. The whole thing is an obvious fraud, as this particular audio I'm telling you now with the facts I'm giving you should clear any doubt in your mind about a so-called virus being the cause of a human being's natural disease. Now let's move up to a book, to 1948, Clinical Diagnosis by Laboratory Methods, Todd and Sanford, the 11th edition. We're going to turn to page 848 under the title of Vaccines. This is how they make vaccines. Bacterial vaccines, sometimes called bacterians, which have come to play an important role in therapeutics, are suspensions of definite numbers of dead bacteria in physiological salt solution. While in many cases ready prepared or stock vaccines are satisfactory, it is usually desirable and often imperative for best results to use vaccines which are especially prepared for each patient from bacteria which have been freshly isolated from his own lesion. These are called autogenous vaccines. It is only in this way that one can be certain of getting the exact strain of bacterium that is producing the disease. Now, let's go over a couple of points here. First of all, they're talking about bacteria, living things that you can see under an ordinary microscope. You can only see the virus, as you recall, under an electron microscope, which only sees dead things. And that's because the material they put under that microscope is dead material from animals that they have made sick and killed. But notice here where it says the only way that can be certain of getting the exact strain that is producing the disease. Once again, they see, say you have a cut, and you take some of that mucus or pus and put it on the microscope and you see the germs or the bacteria. Once again, they're concluding that the bacteria was the cause of the pus rather than the result of the pus. It's like a cancerous tumor. It didn't cause itself. Arthritis doesn't cause itself. Symptoms don't cause themselves. They all have causes. These causes are basically, as you're going to learn later on in another audio, are toxemia. But these people are practicing isopathy. Vaccinations are based upon isopathy. That was Dr. Joseph Lux in 1823, who actually taught medical school that the product of disease would prevent disease. And the only thing they've really found out, the shysters found out anyway, like Rivers, is that the product of disease will cause disease. And this they did in their laboratory over and over and over again, producing every kind of symptom that's labeled and classified as a different disease by injecting disease into that body. They injected the result of the disease, not the cause of the disease. Now let's move up to a little book called A Handbook on Infantile Paralysis. It was condensed from an article in Good Housekeeping, compiled by a lady named Maxine Davis. And at the top of the book it says, for your child's greater security. And at the bottom, I love this part, it says, reviewed and approved by the leading infantile paralysis authorities. Well, you know who they are by now. That's Thomas Rivers, Jonas Salk, John Enders, Thomas Francis, all the major players in the deception of the polio virus supposedly causing disease, or the human disease of polio. Let's see what they have to say here. And on page 2 it says, polio is caused by a virus, an organism so small that it has never been seen even through electron microscope. There it is. You know, I mean, the public is just being lied to. These people who write these books are being lied to. The whole entire world was simply being lied to by Thomas Rivers, Jonas Salk, and the rest of these racketeers and Rockefeller people, which I should call Racketfellow people because they must have performed the biggest racket since the Yellow Kid sold the Brooklyn Bridge, for God's sake. Let me jump back to 1949. I just received this booklet. I bought it on eBay, just got it the other day. And it's called Polio Can Be Conquered. It's a public affairs pamphlet number 150. And it's written by Alton L. Blakesley. Blakesley is the guy that was one of the key polio researchers and kind of tied together. He was a grantee of the Rockefeller people and the National Foundation. He was part of the crew of reporters. He's the one that, those of you that have my book, shows the picture of the polio virus and says this is a crippler, and then goes on to say that these little specks were magnified 100,000 times under the powerful electron microscope. And here is what he says on page 3. How do you get polio? We don't know yet how polio spreads. Our enemy is a tiny virus which cannot be seen. The National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis was hard at work, miseducating and lying to everyone. Here's another pamphlet that I have called 101 Questions and Answers About Polio, reprinted from Parents Magazine, August of 1951. So you can see how they continually lied to the parents, and that's why your parents and grandparents believe the garbage that they believe today. That's why we all believed it. And then they put on there Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, the founder, which he was part of that whole scam too, by the way. But question number 3, they say, what is a virus? A virus is a parasitic organism that cannot live or reproduce without invading a living cell to the injury or destruction of that cell. The polio virus is so small that it has not been identified positively, even with the aid of the electron microscope. I just might mention this was done in August of 1951. These people are already preparing to do a vaccine, and they're sitting there telling you that they don't know what a virus is and never seen it. So they threw a little bit of honesty in there just to keep themselves balanced a little bit. Love this one. Question 47. Is it true that many people carry the polio virus without knowing? And they got quotation marks around carry. Yes. I'm not even going to read the rest of it. They never saw this thing, and yet everybody carries it. How do you guard yourself better than that? Oh, everybody's got the virus, so therefore we're going to vaccinate and do this trial experiment that they did in 1954. And anybody who happens to get polio after we vaccinate them, we'll just say they already had this virus that we never saw inside of them. These people were corrupt. I don't have the words to describe what kind of monsters these people were. Now for the last book, we're going to go to the Book of Health. This book was written in 1953, and I want to give you just a few names, a couple of names of people that were on this board, advisory board. One is Charles Mayo of Rochester, Minnesota, the famous Mayo Clinic. And they've got over 200 leading medical doctors that put this book together. This is also the one that shows the charts of all these measles and whooping cough deaths coming down way before the vaccines were ever produced, which, there's no better source than this. And another fellow that was on his advisory board was Sir Alexander Fleming. You may remember Fleming as the guy that was the discoverer of penicillin. Let's go back here and get just a taste of truth here, where they actually talk about, the doubts, the theories, the conclusions, and that kind of thing. And on page 94, it says, since it is not possible to cultivate viruses away from living tissue on artificial or synthetic media, it is difficult to study their growth habits and their ability to use different types of chemical compounds. Therefore, they must be classified by their ability to infect living cells and by the reactions they produce on the animal body. For this purpose, laboratory animals such as rats, mice, rabbits, guinea pigs, and monkeys have been extremely valuable. Fortunately, for the experimental study of viral diseases, the monkey is susceptible to many of the same viral diseases that infect human beings. In recent years, many viruses have been isolated and studied, so that the list of known viruses now exceeds 50. And of course, you now know how they isolate the virus poison and what they isolate it from, and how the poor animal got sick in the first place. But here's the question. It says, the question of whether or not the viruses produce a true poison or toxin has been the subject of intensive research. It is now believed by many investigators, that's medical people, that the viruses do produce toxins, but that the toxic substance cannot be separated from the virus particle. The reason for this belief is that if large quantities of some purified viruses are injected into a laboratory animal, an effect is produced so rapidly that one may conclude that an active toxin is present. The role that these toxins play in disease production is not clearly defined. Well, the reason it's not clearly defined, folks, is really simple now that you have some understanding of this. They're injecting poison into the body and claiming that's the cause of human disease. Obviously, that is not the case. The fact that they're trying to separate the element of poison and poison is absurd. But that's where the virus goes back to, the word poison, with our snake venom like we talked about in that 1913 book. These people actually were trying to isolate the element of poison in poison. So if you had a couple of ounces of rattlesnake venom, they wanted to take that venom and somehow separate it and find out the element that was poison. You know, that's like putting acid on your arm and it eats down to the bone and you say, well, it really wasn't the acid, it was some element in there we call a virus that ate up the flesh of your arm. I mean, the whole thing is based upon ignorance and lies. And just to close this out, it was the National Foundation with Basil O'Connor, Thomas Rivers, Thomas Francis, John Edwards, Jonas Salk, and all the rest of these people who lied deliberately to the government and to the American people about the poliomyelitis virus and promoted the idea that some poison was the cause of natural disease. And now you know and have a very powerful weapon in your arsenal to stop this, not stop, but sink this vaccination boat. Okay, so listen to this several times because it's something you need to memorize and put into your brain so that you can convince and talk to other people about this. Thank you for listening, and we will have more audios, and we will cover more and more of the fraud of the whole virus promotion in the first place. Thank you.
I just shake my head when I read all these books. They all repeat the same nonsense. The virus is so small that causes disease, it can't be seen. Either they thought the people were so stupid or they knew that the people had no power to do anything about it. I think I'm going to call the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis the National Foundation for Disinformation and Lies. Well, I hope you learned something, because I sure did a whole lot many years ago. And you people need to wake up to what's going on. Signing off, Jim Dandy O'Kelly.